thank you all for being here. And before I get started, I've got a couple of, I'll call them housekeeping items that I wanted to cover. First is a funny confession. Most of you may know that my mother is originally from Albemarle. She did leave when she went off to college, where she soon met my dad at Wake Forest. My two siblings and I were born later elsewhere, and then our family moved here in the summer of 1981. So since 1981, now over 40 years ago, I have never actually been inside the hotel building. Now, when I started doing research for this presentation, I really only had a broad overview of the history of the building. I feel that I've included a great deal of information in the presentation today, but to keep this to a reasonable length, I couldn't include everything. I do cover some of the businesses that were in the building, but certainly not all of them. But if you've got any information or you want to add anything, please come up to me after the presentation, because I do plan to keep researching this topic. My hope today, honestly, is just there's something in the presentation that you might not have known before. And I'd love to hear what those things might be. Now, one other item that I want to briefly address is the name of the hotel. At times in my research, I found that it was called the Hotel Albemarle, and other times the Albemarle Hotel. I believe everywhere in the presentation, I refer to it as the Albemarle Hotel, just because that's what I think most people think of as the name, but they were used interchangeably through the history of the building. Now, before I get into the history of the Albemarle Hotel, I wanted to share a little bit of information about a couple of hotels that were here first. Stanley County was first established by the General Assembly of the state of North Carolina in January of 1841. Montgomery County was split at the Yadkin and Petey Rivers, with the land to the west of the rivers becoming Stanley County and the land to the east remaining Montgomery County. The legislature designated the county seat to be known as Albemarle. Several months later, in May of 1841, it was announced that the area post office, known as Smith's Store, was moving to Albemarle. And Smith's Store, if anybody is not familiar with it, was located roughly where the current Albemarle High School is today. It's not clear when they first opened, but by 1848, there were two hotels in town. The Freeman Hotel, that by 1850 had become the Marshall Hotel, was located roughly where the Stanley County Courthouse is today. The Farmers Hotel, also known as the Hearn Inn, was located on First Street at the site of the current post office. Now, the Marshall House was also known as the Marshall Hotel, and it was managed by James Marshall, who was a very prominent businessman and politician in the area. Unfortunately, the only picture we have of this hotel is after it burned in 1899. During its lifetime, the hotel was known by a number of other names, including the Blaylock Hotel and the Central Hotel. Now, oddly enough, just yesterday, from the beginning, I found a little additional information that from the beginning of 1891 until at least the end of 1892, it was known as the Albemarle Hotel. Now, the Hearn Inn was the Hearn family home, and it was located on South First Street, where, like I said, where the post office is. The hotel was originally operated by Eben Hearn, who was the first sheriff of Stanley County, and it was later managed by his son, Sidney Hearn. Now, Albemarle began to grow when the Yadkin Railroad had completed the first rail line into Stanley County in 1899. The line ran from Salisbury into Albemarle and on to Norwood. The growth led James Cannon out of Concord and John Eford from Stanley County to establish both the Wiscasset Mills and Eford Manufacturing in the late 1890s. This population chart showed the astonishing growth of the community at the time. So you can see on the first couple of lines how much it was growing. It was a surprise. I did find an ad that was, I believe it was from 1916, that said that in 1890, Albemarle had 900 people, and by 1916, there were 9,000 people. I have no idea where that came from, but I believe this is a little more accurate. As the community grew, there was a need for additional hotel space. After the Marshall Hotel had burned, W.T. Huckabee Sr. the owner of the building, rebuilt the hotel as a new central hotel. The hotel was an important part of the downtown landscape until the 1930s when it became Stanley General Hospital. And one thing that's always, this is one of my favorite Stanley County history pictures. I love this picture. The building's just a neat looking building. And for those of you that may not know, my family's Starnes Jewelry Store, and the space on the right was the original location of the store. Now, the Marylise Hotel, under the management of Alice Mabry, was located on the southwest corner of 1st and Main Streets. This hotel opened in the fall of 1908. It is thought that this hotel had the first indoor water system of any real size in the county. Alice Mabry ran the hotel until her death in 1930, and then the hotel was taken over by her daughters, who ran it until 1964, and then the hotel was demolished soon after that. Now, a second railroad line, the Winston-Salem southbound, was completed through Albemarle in 1910, and this led to an increase in traffic. This line connected with the Norfolk and Western Railroad in Winston-Salem and the Atlantic Coast Line in Wadesboro. So I'm sort of showing you all of this just so you can see how the community was continuing to grow. Now, Albemarle was like many communities around the state, and because of the tremendous growth that was going on, there were efforts led by the Good Roads movement to improve the road system around the state. The state began improving the shortest route between Charlotte and Raleigh, and that happened to head through Albemarle. Now, the local newspapers, like this May 29th, 1919 edition of the Albemarle News that's shown on the screen, began to promote the idea of building a new hotel in the community. They wanted to accommodate all of the anticipated travelers that would be coming through. This is just another example of newspapers' efforts to promote the idea of a hotel. Now, the August 30th, 1921, Stanley News-Herald announced that 25 to 30 of the wealthiest men in town met to discuss the need for a new hotel. They formed a committee that would reach out to the community to see who might be interested in purchasing stock in this new endeavor. J.M. Boyette was elected the chairman, and the other members on this committee included M.J. Harris, T.C. Rivers, A.C. Heath, A.P. Harris, and Dr. W.C. Fitzgerald, who we'll come back to in just a moment. At the same time, the local newspapers continued to promote the idea of a new hotel. The editorial on the screen concludes with, "Let us all decide now that we are going to put this new hotel proposition over the top." Now, it took a little bit of time, but the March 17, 1922 Stanley News-Herald carried the big news that Dr. Fitzgerald, who was a local dentist, would build a new hotel on property he had just recently purchased from P.J. Honeycutt. The Greensboro Daily News carried an interesting article the next day that stated that the new hotel in Albemarle would be practically a duplicate of Statesville's new hotel. Unfortunately, I did not find a specific mention of what hotel it was referring to. However, based on these postcards, I think it's safe to assume that the Vance Hotel that was nearing completion at the time was the likely similar hotel. And I will get back to this in a moment. Now, I did go back and look at the deed when Dr. Fitzgerald purchased the land on 2nd Street from P.J. Honeycutt. He had purchased the land in early February. According to the Stanley News-Herald at the time of the purchase, it mentioned that Dr. Fitzgerald, his original plan was actually to build an apartment building. Now, just to go on a little, very momentary side trip about Dr. Fitzgerald, I did want to share that he was originally from Virginia, and he graduated from the dentistry program of the University College of Medicine in Richmond in the class of 1905. He moved to Albemarle in 1906 and opened the dental practice in the Central Hotel. The manager of the hotel at the time was Maud Hearn, who was originally from Troy, and the two of them met and got married in 1908. Together, they continued to run the Central Hotel until 1919. And this was important because it just shows that Dr. Fitzgerald really had a lot of experience with hotel work. Now, after the announcement about Dr. Fitzgerald's new hotel, local business leaders did continue to purchase stock in this new business, but Dr. Fitzgerald did maintain majority control. The architect that he hired for the new hotel was Louis Asbury, who was from Charlotte, and several of the other structures in Albemarle that he designed were the four shown on the screen. The Denning home that is on North 2nd Street, if I get this right. The Dr. J.C. Hall's, is also on North 2nd. John Eford's home, unfortunately, is gone, and I'm afraid I don't remember what happened to the Fitzgerald home. Now, Asbury's drawings for the Albemarle Hotel are in the collections at the J. Murray Atkins Library at the University of Charlotte. And I thought I would take just a moment. There were 10 pages, and just to give you an idea, I'll let you take a look at them. We're just going to slide through them just kind of quickly. So front elevation, north elevation and rear elevation, south elevation, plan for the basement, of course the first floor, second floor, third floor and fourth floor, some of the framing plans, revised plans, door details, and that was all of them. If anybody has interest in seeing those in more detail, just see me afterwards, and we can either look at them, more closely on the computer, or I should be able to tell you how you can get to see them online. They are available online. Now, an additional part of the Atkins Library collection does include Asbury's drawings for the Vance Hotel in Statesville that I mentioned just a minute ago. Now, these drawings showing the two, they're not quite as closely matched as I think the postcards look like, but at least you can still see that, that they're similar, and Louis Asbury was the connection between the two hotels. Now, contracts for the construction of the Albemarle Hotel were awarded on April 3rd, 1922. The Good Construction Company out of Charlotte was given the contract for actually building the building. The Albemarle Plumbing Company was given the contract for the plumbing and heating, and the E.L. Hearn Company was awarded the contract for the electrical wiring. Now, according to the April 22, 1922 High Point Enterprise, there were two businessmen from High Point who had been traveling around the states of North and South Carolina. They met with Dr. Fitzgerald to talk about his new hotel. The doctor told them he was going to incorporate several ideas for his new hotel from the recently completed Sheraton Hotel in High Point. One interesting thing, my oldest son, who is quite a historian in his own right, was like, oh, Sheraton Hotel, maybe this had something to do with the big Sheraton chain, and it actually does not. This was not related to that. But in particular, what Dr. Fitzgerald was going to copy from the Sheraton, he said it was the assembly room would be similar to, the assembly room in the Albemarle Hotel would be similar to the ballroom in the Sheraton. And the doctor also told the man he would later visit High Point to purchase all of the furniture for his new building. Now, according to the June 2nd, 1922 Stanley News Herald, the first brick was laid for Dr. Fitzgerald's new hotel in late May. It was likely on May 30th of that year, but the article, to me, it's a little bit unclear. Now, in July of 22, Dr. Fitzgerald, along with J.E. Ewing, who worked for P.J. Honeycutt at his furniture store, along with their wives, attended the furniture show at the Southern Furniture Exposition Building in High Point. Their goal was to purchase furniture for the hotel. The bedroom furniture chosen for all of the rooms was a Louis XVI style walnut suite purchased from the Imperial Manufacturing Company out of Statesville. The mattresses and box springs were all purchased from the Mebane Bedding Company out of Mebane, North Carolina. And the interesting one to me that was the lobby furniture. The lobby furniture was a reed style that was manufactured by the same company that provided the reed furniture for the lobby of the Grove Park Inn. Now, the White Furniture Company out of Mebane was known to have built a lot of the furniture for the Grove Park Inn when it was originally constructed, but I couldn't find anything that specifically said that that company built the reed furniture. But regardless, at the time the Albemarle Hotel was completed, the Grove Park Inn and the Albemarle Hotel were the only hotels in the state that had this style furniture in their lobbies. Now, also in July, Dr. Fitzgerald announced that he had closed a deal with J.A. Groves for a piece of property behind the hotel. Dr. Fitzgerald had a plan to build a swimming pool and a large garage, and I had never run across that before. Now, according to the local paper, outdoor pools in hotels within the state of North Carolina, that was a rarity. Very, very few even existed. As far as I know, that never happened. The clipping on the screen is from 1929, a Sanborn fire insurance map, and you can see down at the bottom where it says Albemarle Hotel, that'd be the front of the building. And back in the back of the building, there is a structure there, but there's no indication of a pool or a large garage. So it doesn't look like that ever came to pass, and I do not know why. In November 1922, the hotel hired local electrician Eben Hearn to install an electric sign on the roof. The article on the screen says that it will be conspicuous on dark nights for miles around and likewise a thing of beauty. As the hotel was nearing completion, the excitement in the community continued to grow. One local resident shared his thoughts with the Stanley News Herald editor, A.C. Honeycutt, when he said, "Albemarle is taking on real city airs." I shared that with my parents early on when I was putting this together, and they weren't as fond of this quote, but I had to work it in there somehow. Now, according to the February 8th, 1923 edition of the Albemarle Press, the hotel was completed in late January of 1923. The picture on the screen is from the January edition of the local school paper, and it shows what the hotel looked like just prior to opening. According to the Albemarle Press article, the hotel first opened for guests on January 30th, and it followed with an opening for the general public on February 1st. In addition to information about the opening of the hotel, the February 8th, 1923 Albemarle Press actually included a list of the names of all the guests who were there during the first week of operation. Included on that list were visitors from 13 states that included, and it's the ones in red, included North Carolina, South Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, Tennessee, Virginia, Maryland, Massachusetts, New York, Pennsylvania, Ohio, Michigan, Colorado, and also Washington, D.C. So to me, that was stunning to have so many from so many different places that first week. Now, when the hotel was built, there were 4 street front spaces that were made available for additional businesses. 2 businesses that opened with the hotel were the Albemarle Hotel Barbershop and the City Meat Market. Now, what happened to the City Meat Market is not clear, but I think it was in the building until about 1926 when the ownership of the meat market changed, and they likely moved to a new location. When the barbershop opened, it was operated by J.E. Long. In February of 1924, Long sold his interest in the business at C.F. Leffler, while at the same time, Leffler, who had been at a different barbershop, sold his interest. His was the Ideal Barbershop. He sold his interest in the Ideal Barbershop to Mr. Long, so they just switched places. Now, the picture on the screen, C.E. Leffler is on the right, along with his customer, K.P. Eford. The barber in the middle chair is Crowell Mann, and the rest of the men in the photo, unfortunately, are not known. By late December of 1925, the Harvard Eford Grocery Company had moved into the hotel building, but the business closed early the following year. Dean's Confectionery took its place in May of 1926, but Dean's was unfortunately gone by November of that year. In August of 27, the space became the home of the new public library. Now, the library had originally been an extension of the local women's club, and it had been located in the community building shown on the screen that was located on South 2nd Street. When the library moved to the hotel and opened on August 15th of 1927, it became the first public library in the county. On a side note, the woman in the picture was recently identified as Lottie Gaddy, who some of you may remember where she worked at the Goody Shop for a number of years. Now, there aren't many pictures of the interior of the hotel building, but we're lucky to have several that show the library. And I could be wrong, I believe the young man in the picture on the right that's sitting at one of the tables, maybe Dent Turner's father. Now, even though it was the picture on the right is much later, this is the first librarian for the public library system. Willie Welch, she had been in Alabama and moved to Albemarle and was here about 2 years, but she was the first librarian under the public library. Now, according to this clipping from a 1927 map that was produced by County Surveyor J.M. Furr, the hotel business included, or the businesses in the hotel included the barber shop, Boston Hosiery, and Carolina Printing. Now, the library is not shown on this map, so I'm assuming that this map must have been made right before the library moved in. The 1928 city directory showed that the same businesses, including the library, were still in the building. And the 1930 directory that's on the right showed that Boston Hosiery was no longer there, but the rest were still the same. Now, Dr. Fitzgerald and his wife were not just owners, but they also served as resident managers of the hotel. Unfortunately, Maud, his wife, passed away in 1927 due to an extended illness. Dr. Fitzgerald later married Alice Reagan, and they continued to run the hotel until 1932, when Dr. Fitzgerald decided to spend more time with his dental business. During August of 32, the Stanley News and Press announced that Dr. Fitzgerald had sold the hotel to S.Q. Myers and Sons. That was a small chain of hotels. One of the sons, Lestus Myers, became the manager. Now, at the time, this hotel chain was made up of the Carlheim Hotel in Lenoir, the Hotel Hickory in Hickory, and the Caldwell Hotel in Morganton. After taking over the Albemarle Hotel, the Myers proceeded to renovate and refurbish much of the interior of the building. In 1935, the Myers Company leased the Hotel Concord. Lestus Myers, who'd been in Albemarle, became the new manager in Concord, and the Myers Corporation promoted Bob Richards, who'd been an assistant in the Albemarle Hotel, to become the new manager. Now, Richards, of course, many of you may remember him, was incredibly active in the community for the next 3 decades, and he did actually later become part owner of the hotel. Now, the hotel dining room had been very popular in the early years, and the Myers continued to make sure that it maintained its importance to the community. The picture on the right is a menu from the hotel from May 31st of 1935. In 1938, a banquet hall that had been located on the 2nd floor was turned into 5 guest rooms. At the same time, an office space on the 1st floor was remodeled to be used as part of the banquet hall on the 1st floor. The upgraded space on the first floor was actually now larger than what the big banquet hall that had been on the second floor, and it made more sense because the kitchen was on the first floor anyway. This also helped the hotel to increase its role as the central hub of activity for the business community, for local families, and of course for the travelers visiting the area. The hotel served as a meeting location for many of the local civic organizations. Some of them include the Optimists, the Rotary, the Civitans, the Lions Clubs. All were meeting at the hotel at the same time. Obviously not meeting at the same time, but during the same time period. Other groups such as the Credit Women's Breakfast Club, the Chamber of Commerce Directors, the Furniture Dealers Association, the International Underwriters Club, the Women's Club, the JCs, and there were still others, all were meeting at the hotel. Now the picture on the screen is the Tuesday Bridge Club, and according to the History Center records, this was taken in the ballroom of the hotel on February 16th, 1956. Now some of you may recognize this young lady. The hotel also served as a primary space for special events. Mom and Dad had one of their wedding-related dinners at the hotel. Now, during 1946, work was done in the dining room. The walls were repainted and repapered, and the fixtures were all replaced. The lobby was repainted, while new carpet and furniture was planned for a large number of the rooms. Now, at this time, the hotel had 65 rooms. In November of 1946, the Stanley News and Press announced that the owners of the hotel had leased some of the first floor business spaces to a new radio station that was going to be started. Offices for the Albemarle Merchants Association and the Chamber of Commerce would then move to the basement. So the radio station was going to be on, right off of 2nd Street. By early 1947, however, the plans had changed and the radio station now was going to be located in the basement. The radio station, WABC of course, stayed in the hotel building until it was either about late 1966 or early 1967 when they moved to North Street behind Wilhelm's gas station. Now in May of 1950, the hotel added 15 more private bathrooms to the rooms. There were now 67 of the 60 rooms that had private accommodations. Additional carpeting and redecorating went on at this time, and I'm assuming that the reason the number count of the hotel rooms, the reason for it decreasing from 65 down to 60, they must have used some of the hotel rooms to create the bathrooms, to make the private bathrooms. Now, over the years, there have been a number of other businesses located on the first floor of the hotel. A few of them include the Albemarle Building and Loan Association that moved in during 1937, and they were there until 1951. Frank Leffler, who I mentioned earlier, who's shown in this picture, and his barbershop were still in the hotel during the 50s. Unfortunately, Mr. Leffler died in 1956, but the business did continue under Crowell Mann. The barbershop seems to have remained in the hotel until the late 60s or early 70s, but if anybody knows more exact numbers, please let me know after the presentation. In 1961, Flav Whitley from Whitley's Luncheonette took over the dining room and the ballroom of the hotel. He stayed there for 2 years and then returned back to the Luncheonette. The ad on the left was when he first took over, and the one on the right was when he was returning back to the Luncheonette. Now, the Paramount Construction Company, led by Dewey Sides, moved into the building in 1962 and was located in part of the basement. They moved to one of the first floor spaces in 1964 and were still there at least until 1968. Now, on April 1st, 1963, the current owners were S.L. Myers, I believe that was Lestis Myers, and Bob Richards. And they signed a long-term lease agreement with the Milner Hotel chain out of Detroit. The Milner chain managed over 70 hotels and were at the time expanding into North Carolina. On Monday, July 27, 1964, it was announced that the Albemarle Hotel would be demolished and it would be replaced by a new 30-unit motel. The current building that we know today was going to be demolished in stages, so they would demolish part and build 10 units of the motel, then demolish more of the current building and build 10 more until they completed all 3 sections. Now, due to fire safety issues by the North Carolina Insurance Department, it was determined that the current hotel building would need to be closed immediately. The lease with the Milner chain was canceled and the hotel closed on August 1st of 1964. Now, the picture on the screen was taken July 31st, the last full day of operation. In September, it was announced that the plans for the demolition of the hotel and the construction of the new motel had been canceled, and the future of the building was now quite uncertain. Even though the hotel itself was now closed, the streetfront businesses were allowed to remain. In September and October of '64, everything was sold. Everything in the hotel portion was sold. In February of 1968, James Braswell, who was the president of the State Bank of Wingate, purchased the building and he planned to put it back into use. Now, the community kind of began to wonder what would happen with the building, and by July, there were rumors that Mr. Braswell was actually going to build an apartment building. Was going to convert it to an apartment building. About late April or very early May of '69, the hotel changed hands again when it was purchased by Bobby Harold Barbie, who was in the insurance business and later a politician from the Locust area. Now, the next couple of years are a little unclear, but the hotel was eventually purchased by Leo Rushing, a contractor out of Marshville. In early February of 1973, Hugh Carpenter announced plans he was going to work with Mr. Rushing to reopen the hotel as a rooming house. The Stanley News and Press then followed up in the next edition of the with an article where Jack Neal said, not going to happen. He wasn't going to let it happen. He said that all of the concerns that that caused the hotel to be closed in 1964, none of them had been addressed. So until all of those things were addressed, and this was now 10 years later, until all of those things were addressed, they weren't going to let anything happen in the hotel. Now, an amusing thing happened on the front of the building, in the business spaces, in the fall of 1970 during that year's election. You may or may not be able to see that, but both the Democratic and Republican Party headquarters were opened in the business spaces. Now, the Snap said that even though the offices were close, they said, and I quote, "Party leaders declined to comment how close together they might be on the issues." Now, in 1974, the hotel finally had some major renovations that allowed the reopening of the guest rooms upstairs. Parts of the building were fireproofed and rewired. Walls were replastered and repainted. Air conditioning and carpeting had to be added to the rooms. The plumbing was extensively renewed. A new heating system was installed, a steam heating system, and the exits and stairs were updated and 2 fire escapes were added. The hotel opened around September of '74 under the management of Eric Sustar, and the restaurant managed by David Klug opened the following month. The restaurant seems to have lasted just a couple of years, and over time the hotel itself went into another state of decline. Now, in the fall of 1989, a number of years later, the owner was Albert Esposito of Crow's Nest Construction Company out of Monroe. The picture on the screen shows where they were doing some restoration work on the exterior of the hotel building. At the same time, there were renovations done on the inside. In April of 1991, there was an effort to see about converting the hotel into a home for the elderly. the Albemarle Downtown Development Corporation pushed a survey to get some public feedback on that idea. In July of 2000, it was announced that the hotel was to be purchased by an investment group. At the time, there were about 40 residents who were still in the building, and they all had moved out by the end of that year. Now, in June of 2002, the Bank of Stanley, that was the owner at the time, had work done to improve the look of the outside of the building, and they did remove the old fire escapes. Over the years that followed, there was talk at different times about what could be done to the building. In 2014, a feasibility study was done to determine the best use for the building, and it was determined that it could be successfully turned into a mixed-use residential, residence, and retail space. In early 2015, the City of Albemarle worked to give the hotel local historic designation status in hopes it would help spur development. Then in 2017, my understanding, and please correct me if I get this wrong, Jordan Jones with Anchor and Pillar began looking into the possibility of redeveloping the hotel building. After Jordan and the city eventually came to an agreement, it took time to work out the details before the project began. Now, in April of 2021, local photographer Mike Lanier, if any of you are familiar with my different perspective online, he takes a lot of, he's the drone guy, takes a lot of pictures. He was given permission to take some pictures of the interior of the building prior to the work being done to restore it. So I'm going to scroll through, it's about 14 pictures, so you can see what it looked like. Well, that's not the interior. So even though I've never been inside, this was an interesting, it kind of gave me an appreciation. I feel like there should be some kind of music during this part. So now we're going to turn the microphone over to Jordan Jones so he can share the rest of the story.
Good afternoon, everyone. Again, Jordan Jones. Thank you, Lewis, for the great job of history there. It would have been helpful for me to know that a few years ago. For example, we did not know about the history of the bank. The bank was actually located on the ground floor retail bays, and they actually had a bank vault in the very back of the building. That part of the building was not safe for us to actually walk back there, and so we didn't know about the bank vault, so we did not plan for it. So $20,000 later, we successfully removed the bank vault from the building. So thank you so much for that history. I just had a couple of pictures myself. Wanted to talk about kind of the condition of the building when we purchased it, some challenges we faced during designing the project, a little bit about the process, and then some other fun work we had towards the end of the project. I call this kind of the sausage making process, kind of the view behind the scenes of kind of what we really did across the street. So Lewis already had some of these pictures as well from Mr. Lanier, and he did a great job documenting some of the history of the building. Again, we bought this from URE Bank in the end of 2017, and the building was just declining year after year after year. We didn't have too many structural issues. It was primarily roof leaks. The roof was starting to deteriorate very rapidly, and when we finally started renovations in 2021, my architect called it the golden year of the building. It was a year in which either you do the renovation or you have to demolish the structure, because it was just getting to a point where it would not be feasible to actually start to think about renovating the building. So when, again, we bought it, you could see just the devastation that was starting to take place in the building. You could see the old bed in there as well. So when the residents left the building, they just left a lot of their personal goods behind with them. So some challenges we faced when we bought the building, we started planning for the renovation. First was the amount of asbestos, lead-based paint, and mold in the building, particularly the amount of asbestos. We had expected to see some, but we spent about $500,000 just removing the asbestos and lead-based paint from the building. This is a lot more than typical for this age of a building. I did another historic renovation, another hotel in downtown Fayetteville. That building was opened in 1925, so 3 years newer, but we only had about $200,000 of asbestos. That hotel was 3 times the size of this one. So just a significant amount of asbestos. And here you can see all the mold as well starting to get just all over the building. At that point in time, when we bought the building, there were no code compliant stairs. The only stair that was at the building at that point in time was a central monumental stair. It was just simply not wide enough to not meet building code, so that's why we installed the 2 new stairs on the exterior of the building. Another key issue we faced is the existing elevator shaft in the building that was there when it was originally constructed was not code compliant either. You could not fit a gurney inside of the old elevator shaft. And so we realized we had to build a new elevator. And so this is a picture showing where we're starting to cut out and frame out what today is our current elevator. We were trying to think through again how to reuse the building, and the historic tax credit people, the State Historic Preservation Office and National Park Service that kind of govern how you renovate these older buildings told us we had to preserve what they called the volume of the space in the lobby as well as in the dining room. My initial plan for the dining room was actually to put 2 apartments in there. But I was basically told I could not do that. Thankfully, then we were able to connect with Ryan Beebe with Open Up Christine's, but that was a kind of a key change for us to think through whether or not you could have a 3,000 square foot restaurant in downtown Albemarle. It's one of the larger restaurant spaces in downtown, and so we had some concerns about finding the right operator. This picture here is basically to show how, again, some of the spaces we actually could not access. We might have been able to walk safely in about 80 to 85% of the building. The rest of it, we didn't know ceiling heights. We didn't know the condition of the structure. We knew very little about those portions of the building. So in terms of process, the first thing probably everyone here recognized was we immediately put up all the plywood. And the reason why is we pulled out all the windows of the building. So as part of our historic renovation, we restored all the windows. So there's a great company out of Greensboro, North Carolina called Double Hung Windows. And all they do is basically restore historic windows. So their team came in, they took each window out of the building, they put it in a crate, they took pictures of the window, they labeled it, they took the windows up to their factory up in Greensboro. The first thing they do there is they take the windows and put them in a giant kiln, basically just to warm them up so they can get all the lead-based paint, any asbestos off the windows as well. If there's any rot in the window frame, they'll repair that. And then they reinsert the historic single pane of glass. So all these windows still have the existing glass in them from over 100 years ago. After we moved the windows, we started the demolition phase. So this is where we removed all non-historic components inside the building so we could convert from 60-ish hotel rooms to the 29 apartments we have today. So you can see the amount of old materials we pulled out of the building. After we had removed everything from the inside of the building, we wanted to get the building watertight. So that's when we installed the new roof and we started putting back in the windows as well. You'd have a watertight building before you start to build back on the interior of the building. We then started framing out all the walls in the inside, again going from all the different hotel rooms to much larger apartments. And then we installed MEP, that stands for Mechanical, Electrical, and Plumbing. Again, there were not private bathrooms in the hotel rooms. This picture here is actually the ground floor where the surface parking lot is. We put some apartments down there as well, and there had never been plumbing in that part of the building either. So we had to demolish all the existing concrete that was down there and put in all new plumbing. We also installed the building's first a sprinkler system to make sure, again, it was a very safe building as well. So that's the black pipes you see. A lot of that is the sprinkler system. And then we went and started installing all new finishes. So new drywall, new paint, new sinks, toilets, everything in the building is basically brand new that you can see today. So some challenges we faced during the renovation. As we all know, this happened during COVID. This particularly happened when so much construction was happening, and it was very challenging to obtain materials. And as we all see today, is the inflation that was going on. So you can actually see these walls here actually made out of metal stud. Typically, when you renovate a building that's 4 or 5 stories, you use wood. We all know is when we went to Home Depot or Lowe's and did a job ourselves, how expensive wood was getting at that point in time. And it was actually cheaper for us to buy metal studs than to buy a 2x4. And so again, just the challenges we faced rethinking through the materials we needed, how to get them on site, and what was the most affordable with prices changing pretty rapidly. Another piece of feedback we had is the Historic People State Historic Preservation Office and National Park Service first said, hey, the floors in the building are so devastated, the existing hardwood floors, you can just put new flooring on top of it. So we had our team put a recovery board down, stapled it, and then we planned on installing new carpet and vinyl tile on top of it. And then when we provided them an update, showing the picture, they said, actually, way more of the flooring is in better condition than we thought. So now you have to actually historically reuse all the existing wood flooring. And so then we had to take all the recovery board out. We had men on their knees pulling staples out of 4 stories of the building. I mean, it was just weeks. Men just taking staples out of the floor so then we could reuse the floors. But you can see just some of the pictures here of the conditions of the floor were in really tough shape. And as I shared earlier on, we couldn't walk the whole building, so we didn't know what the condition of the entire building was. So this is one picture here. This is one section of the building we could not get into. It was in such bad condition, we had to demolish the entire structure. So we had to cut off the entire roof, rebuild the entire roof deck, cut out a lot of the floors, and rebuild all of that as well. So it was a lot more structural and demolition work than we had expected. Another issue we had, this is down in the ground floor next to the parking lot. Again, part of the building we could not access. We didn't realize the height from the floor to the ceiling was so low. Some spots was less than 8 feet, which means we couldn't really use these spaces as apartments. You can't hang drywall, you can't have HVAC vents going through the space. So we had to demolish all the concrete down there and re-pour it so we'd have enough ceiling height space for individuals to live in there. But she turned out quite beautiful. So these are just a few quick pictures. This again is one of our historic corridors. We did preserve all the old hotel room openings. So you can see in the hallway, it looks like there's a lot of different apartments. Those are just where some of the doors used to be to some old hotel rooms. And then the inside, again, just a tremendous project. I don't see anyone here from Stokes Construction. Stokes Construction was incredible. The amount of time, sweat, and effort they invest in this project was quite incredible. You all should be so proud for having such a great company, Stokes Construction, here locally. So the finishes here, again, all new, finishing the insides, a lot of the flooring where we could, we kept it. Ceiling fans, bathrooms have granite countertops. We have some tile backsplash in the bathrooms. Stainless steel appliances and brand new cabinets in the apartments as well. And again, the windows just look tremendous, allow a lot of natural light into the units as well. And there's the exterior. So yeah, that's a little bit of inside of the process. And I do want to recognize, I have a lot of favorite people in here, but Miss Lavelle right here, she was our first resident, moved in March of 2021, I believe it was. So thank you for coming, Ms. Lavelle. Thank you so much for living through some of the renovation, particularly towards the end as well. So thank you for coming. And with that, I will see if there are any questions, unless, Pat, you wanted to have another formal transition announcement. Yeah, any questions? Yes, sir.
Does every room have a window?
Every room has a window. Yes, sir. Excuse me? Bunches of windows. I forget the window count, but you can see it on the side here. A significant amount of natural light in every single unit. A lot of the units, some of the residents tell me they don't really need light. Use the lights during the daytime because there's so many windows and a lot of great natural light.
8 windows in my
8 windows in Miss Lavelle's unit. So yes, a lot. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you. So how many have not been taken as of right now?
I believe we have 29 units. I believe, Russ, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe 2 or 3 have not been rented. Those are our 3-bedroom unit we'll see today, and then we have a few 2-bedroom units. You know, one of the key drivers for my interest here, well, first, my mother and my aunt were raised in Baden, and so I do have some local history here. I always remember their stories of when they went to the hotel for brunch after church almost every Sunday. That was kind of a special place for them to go as a family. And so I always brought back some when I was born and raised in Fayetteville, came back here a few times. And then the key interest here for me was supporting the university, supporting Pfeiffer's efforts in downtown, trying to grow a new residential base, a new education program here. Mr. Bramlett, thank you so much for your leadership there. But we've only seen, I think, 1 Pfeiffer student maybe live with us. And so it's really been interesting how few of those students have moved in. We created some 2- and 3-bedroom units, assuming that would be easier for the students to move in. It would bring down their costs. Cost per person would come down. But we simply have not seen any leasing activity from those students yet. But hopefully the program will continue to organize a strong base and use that as a growth vehicle moving forward. Yes?
How much did it finally cost to renovate it?
So total investment in the hotel, we were close to about $9.8 million.
So how much of a budget was that?
I don't recall, Ms. Lavelle. Good question. Yes, sir.
What was the condition of the wiring?
All new wiring. So every single, all the plumbing, wiring, and HVAC ducts were completely removed from the building. So everything in here is brand new. So she is well positioned for another 100 years.
And may I say something?
Please.
And for those of you that are old enough, I worked there in 62 and 63, or right before it closed. I was there when it closed.
Yes.
I'm one of those that can close down Sunday.
Start over so they can hear you.
I worked there in 1962 and 3, I believe it was, maybe a little 64. But, and I was there when it was closed. I've been told I can shut anything down. And, but they did let the Army or whoever, they were doing maneuvers over in Montgomery County. After we closed, they let them come in there even though it was closed and used it. I was the switchboard operator. I was the original Lily Tomlin. Plug in, you could not call out without coming through me. And I give, Olin Richard was a wonderful elevator person. He was so nice. Thank you.
I see one more question back.
But just a comment, Jordan, there may be people here who don't understand how it ended up being financed. So if you can give an overview of that, that would be great.
Yes, one piece of history Lewis did not touch on. Well, he did. I apologize. Think about a different community I work in. So basically, right, individuals in this community came together recognizing the need to have a new hotel when the new road was coming in. And so we use that similar methodology. So in 2021, I partnered with Vicinity Capital and URE Bank to find other individuals in this community that were willing at that point in time to invest in the renovation as well. And so we have 60-ish local investors in the hotel property. Then we also use historic tax credits, and then USDA, the United States Department of Agriculture, provided a loan on the hotel as well. No city investment, but the city, of course, was very supportive of everything we did. Yes, sir.
Total square feet?
Total square footage is around 29,000 square feet.